Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your source material articles, research papers, philosophical texts, and distill it all into surprising, useful knowledge.
Today we've got a stack that really gets at a core tension in human experience. The quest for unique value and influence.
Right. Whether you're trying to dominate a market or, just build a fulfilling long-term relationship, the real challenge is escaping competition.
It's this ultimate pursuit of a monopoly, but that monopoly can look radically different depending on the context.
So today we're going to use some philosophical frameworks, specifically from René Girard and Peter Thiel, to really analyze competition. Then we'll look at how strategic charm has played out historically.
Yeah, with figures from Cleopatra all the way to Marilyn Monroe.
And then we turn that lens inward. We'll look at the psychological strategies. We're talking trust, boundaries, desire, that you need to build authentic relationships that defy that zero-sum game of competition.
Our mission today is to show you when to fight and, maybe more importantly, when to cooperate.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think the best place to start is at the source of all striving, and maybe all conflict, which is desire itself. We have to start with René Girard and his mimetic theory.
Right, because we all tend to believe that our desires are our own, that they come from some deep personal place, like a core need.
And Girard's big idea is that that's basically a fantasy.
He calls it the romantic lie. He argued that human desire isn't instinctual, not like needing water when you're thirsty. Instead, desire is fundamentally social. It's mediated.
Mediated? What does that mean exactly?
It means we see what other people want, and then we start wanting it too. Their wanting it is what gives the object its value for us.
So it's like, if I see someone I admire driving a certain car, my desire for that car isn't really about the car itself?
Not at all. It's a triangle. There's you, the car, and the person you admire. The model. You're actually desiring their desire. The object itself is almost secondary.
And I can see how that immediately leads to conflict.
That's the engine of it all. As soon as two people fixate their mimetic desire on the same thing, a promotion, a house, a partner, they become rivals. And that's where all this unnecessary competition comes from.
Our sources made a really interesting distinction here between what they called external models and internal models.
Yeah, and this is so important. An external model is someone distant, like a celebrity or a character in a book. The desire only flows one way. You want what they have, but they don't know or care.
But the internal models, that's where the trouble starts.
That's the high-risk zone. We're talking about your peers, your colleagues, people you actually know. When you're in that situation, the competition becomes reflexive and really intense.
Because if I see you wanting what I have, it makes me want it even more.
Exactly. Your desire validates its scarcity for me, and my desire validates it for you. It's this vicious, escalating circle.
It sounds absolutely exhausting, and one source called social media a mimetic machine. That's just the perfect description, isn't it?
It's the perfect storm. A constant flood of these high volatility internal models, all disguised as just, aspirational living. It's a feed of manufactured scarcity.
Which brings us directly to Peter Thiel, who actually studied under Girard at Stanford. He basically operationalized this idea for business.
And his big, famous principle is simple and pretty provocative.
Competition is for losers.
Right. And in a capitalist world that celebrates competition, that sounds kind of crazy.
So what's the logic there?
The logic is that extreme competition is just a mimetic trap. If you're all fighting fiercely over price or tiny little features, you're stuck in what he calls the 1 to N mindset. You're just doing something slightly better than what's already out there.
And you're all fighting for smaller and smaller pieces of the pie.
Diminishing returns. So the goal has to be that 0 to 1 shift, creating a totally new category of value. You invent a new game, so you're the only one playing it. That's how you escape the trap.
He gave the example of PayPal's early growth.
Yes. Think about that. They weren't fighting the big banks head on. They were doing something totally new, transferring money online, first for eBay power sellers.
And the growth was insane.
At one point, Thiel said they were compounding at 7% a day, starting with just 24 users. That, for him, was the signal of escape velocity. They weren't just winning a market, they were literally creating one.
They had a monopoly because their value was so unique. The old systems just looked slow and obsolete next to them.
And, this focus on unique value connects to Thiel's much broader and often controversial philosophical views.
Great, we should touch on that.
He often aligns with thinkers like Carl Schmitt. And Schmidt's whole idea was that the political is defined by the distinction between friend and enemy.
So how does Thiel apply that to business?
He applies it by being ruthless in defining the competitive landscape. If you can define your competitors, your enemies, and then engineer your business to be so different that you don't even have to fight them anymore, then you achieve stability. You achieve the space to think and invest long term.
So whether you agree with that political lens or not, the strategic takeaway is this relentless pursuit of differentiation.
Exactly. Now, let's see how that same kind of strategic influence plays out in the social world.
Okay, so if the goal is a monopoly on influence, getting others to value what you offer, a really common tactic is, well, instrumental charm.
Seduction, in this context, isn't just about looks. It's really about skilled influence and persuasion, using social appeal over, say, strict competence.
And we looked at a fascinating piece of research that actually tested this idea in a professional setting. They had mixed sex groups working on a decision-making task.
Yeah, 120 participants. And they were measuring if being socially appealing or charming helped or hindered someone's professional reputation.
And the finding is so important for anyone trying to navigate an office.
It's crucial. The use of charm, or what the research called instrumental flirting, was negatively associated with how competent other group members thought that person was.
Wait, negatively? That seems so counterintuitive. I would assume that if you're charming and friendly, people like you more, so they trust you more.
That's the trade-off. You might gain social capital. People enjoy having you around. They laugh at your jokes. You lose perceived gravitas.
Ah, so it's like the colleague who's always joking around. They're great to have at the office party, but when a huge deadline is looming,
the group instinctively turns to the quieter, more serious person. The charm acts as this kind of cognitive discount on their actual skill. It's like you're seen as prioritizing social appeal or professional depth. But the perception is you can't have both at the same time.
Okay, so if charm has this professional cost, how did some historical figures manage to build a true monopoly of influence without just becoming a commodity? They must have had some kind of unique value.
They applied that feeling concept perfectly. They found their unique vertical trait, their proprietary technology, and they competed only on that.
Let's talk about Cleopatra. She was operating in the hyper-masculine world of Roman politics. She couldn't compete with brute force.
And our sources point out, she wasn't even conventionally beautiful.
No.
She completely sidestepped that Red Queen race of standardized physical look.
So what was her strategy?
Differentiation, intellect, and cultural mystique. She competed on charm, audacity, and intelligence. She spoke multiple languages, she understood philosophy, she presented herself as a living goddess.
That's a value proposition no Roman woman could replicate. They were so culturally restricted. She was literally in a category of one.
But the Romans, especially historians like Plutarch, tried to negate her value by controlling the story about her.
They painted her as manipulative, a witch, someone who just used men.
Even when her political moves, like arguing against a war, were identical to actions taken by Roman women that Plutarch praised, like Octavia. The price of her unique power was losing control of her own legacy.
A few centuries later, you have Ninon de Lenclos in 17th century France, a courtesan who perfected psychological coquetry.
And she achieved what they called moral domination over very powerful men. She really seemed to have cracked the code on how to sustain desire over time.
How did she do it?
Strategic scarcity. Her key advice was, to keep a partner, you must still leave him something to desire. Each day should promise something new or rare for the succeeding.
Constant innovation.
Exactly. She used variety and the promise of future discovery to fight against the natural human love of change. If you give everything away at once, the desire just dies.
It's like making the relationship itself a 0 to 1 proposition, always creating something new instead of settling into that predictable 1 to N plateau.
But our sources mentioned this came at a horrifying human cost, a really poignant warning.
A story about her son.
Yeah. Her son, the Chevalier de Villiers, was raised separately and didn't know she was his mother. He fell in love with her, and when she finally told him the truth to stop him, he killed himself.
Wow, that's just a brutal reminder of the tragedy that can be embedded in that kind of instrumental control and detachment.
It really is. It highlights that deep tension between strategy and genuine connection.
Let's bring this idea of a monopoly into the modern era with someone like Marilyn Monroe. Her power wasn't just her looks, right? That's a commodity.
No, her genius was manufacturing an intellectual monopoly. She strategically blended two things that seemed like opposites: extreme vulnerability and hypersexuality.
And she was the only person in the public mind who owned that unique brand space.
She did. She successfully differentiated the brand, which was Marilyn, from the actual person, Norma Jean.
So the lesson is clear, whether it's in the market, the court, or on stage. Head-on, competition degrades value. Unique differentiation is everything.
But now we have to make a huge transition. Because while that competitive mindset works externally, it is an absolute disaster internally in the world of real long-term intimacy.
Okay, so we're shifting from competitive leverage to cooperative intimacy. The whole rule-book change.
It has to. And Esther Perel's work here is so insightful. She points out this paradox that's at the heart of desire in long-term relationships. It requires balancing two completely opposing needs.
And what are those two needs?
On one hand, you need security and predictability. The absolute rock-solid knowledge that the relationship is safe and stable.
In the other hand,
You need adventure, mystery, and surprise. Desire, she says, happens in the space between those two poles.
so you need the anchor of trust, but you also need enough space to maintain curiosity and novelty. You can't be so fused together that there's nothing left to discover.
And that leads to a critical point. Neediness kills desire. If your partner has to be your constant caretaker, your source of validation, your psychological repairman, you've erased all the mystery.
There's no space left for desire to breathe.
Right. Desire needs enough security so that you can turn your focus away from your partner and back onto yourself, knowing the relationship will still be there when you come back.
That makes perfect sense. And it connects to the research on approach versus avoidance goals in relationships. Can you break that down for us?
It's basically the difference between striving for a good thing versus trying to prevent a bad thing. So, partners who pursue approach goals, you're striving for more intimacy, for fun, for shared growth. They have much higher relationship satisfaction. Their actions are constructive. They're trying to gain positive connection.
Whereas if my focus is on avoidance goals, like making sure I don't start a fight or making sure my partner doesn't get angry,
You're stifling yourself. You're focused on the negative. And avoiding conflict is not the same thing as building intimacy.
and that leads to lower satisfaction.
Much lower for both people. If you're only trying not to lose the relationship, your focus is already on fear and anxiety, not on creating something positive together.
We also have to talk about attachment styles here. How does our basic relational wiring play into all of this?
Well, feeling seen and heard by your partner, that responsiveness, is positively linked to sexual desire. But there are some subtle differences.
Okay.
Anxious attachment, for example, is actually positively associated with sexual desire. The catch is that the desire is often driven by a need for validation, not necessarily secure connection.
And what about avoidant attachment?
Negatively associated with desire. Which makes sense, right? Their whole drive is to maintain distance and independence. But here's the really important ripple effect for you to think about. One partner's avoidance is negatively associated with the other partner's psychological well-being.
So these issues never just stay with one person.
Never. They pollute the entire system.
So how do we build the foundation for a positive, secure system? The sources all seem to agree. It comes down to trust and boundaries.
Trust is built through boring consistency, reliability, accountability, and just consistently telling the truth. We all use white lies to avoid conflict, but the sources are clear that those little things slowly chip away at the foundation of trust.
So if telling a small lie to avoid a minor conflict is a bad idea, what's the better way to handle it when you just can't commit to something?
You communicate honestly about your capacity, not the outcome. So instead of making up an excuse, you say, I'm not sure, can I check my calendar and get back to you? Or if it's emotional, I need a moment to think about this, can we come back to it later? It's honesty over meaning.
And finally, boundaries. Our sources say they are the absolute foundation of any functional relationship. But first, you have to know what your own boundaries are.
Absolutely. If you don't know what you need, you can't ask for it. Journaling can really help here, just to map out your own limits. Once you're clear, the communication has to be assertive. And critically, you don't have to justify the boundary.
That's the hardest part, isn't it? Not feeling like you have to give a long explanation.
You just state the fact. You can use phrases like, I would love to help with that, but I just don't have the capacity right now. Or even just the simple definitive, that's not going to work for me.
Full stop.
Full stop. Put a period on it, the boundary stands on its own.
So that brings us to the end of this deep dive. We've gone from building business monopolies with 0 to 1 thinking to, historical strategies of influence.
But I think the most profound insight for your own life is this dual lesson. Success in the external world might require competitive differentiation, but true satisfaction in your intimate life requires a complete pivot to cooperation.
Favoring approach goals, building trust, and getting really clear on boundaries.
Exactly.
So, what does this all mean for you navigating your own circles? If Girard is right and desire is social, then we're not just imitating the desires of others, we are also constantly modeling desire for our friends, our colleagues, our partners.
And if we connect that to the big picture, the final provocative thought for you is this. What kinds of aspirations and longings are you, maybe inadvertently, cultivating in your own circle?
Yeah.
Are you modeling competitive anxiety and scarcity, or are you modeling the pursuit of something more authentic, cooperative, and, well, uncommodified? Something to mull over as you think about the power of your own unique value.